Hey, Doc Squad. Dr. White here with the Business Analysis Doctor. Today, I'll be sharing 50 of the most essential questions you need to ask during requirement elicitation. The key requirement gathering and elicitation categories we'll discuss include business need identification and refinement, stakeholder identification and engagement, process and situation analysis, requirements, definition and analysis, risk management and impact analysis, prioritization and decision making, solution design and validation, testing and quality assurance, and metrics and reporting. The first category is business need identification and refinement. This area focuses on understanding the core problem or opportunity driving the project. Questions in this category help define the business objectives and ensure alignment with organizational goals. Let's look at some common pitfalls for these questions and tips to avoid them. A common pitfall is vague or overly broad questions. Avoid this by asking targeted questions about the measurable business outcomes to be expected. Also, don't assume the stated problem is the real problem. Use probing techniques like the 5 whys to dig deeper into root causes. Failing to confirm business goals is another mistake to avoid. Be sure to regularly validate that the business need is still relevant and aligns with leadership priorities. Now, the first question BAs should ask during elicitation is, why do we need to accomplish this? So why is this question important? It matters because it helps define the justification for the project or initiative and also provides a reference point to look back on to stay on track. Now let's discuss what to look for in a response. Look for clear business objectives that articulate what the organization intends to achieve with the project, problems that need to be solved, describing the current pain points, inefficiencies, or unmet needs that are preventing the organization from achieving its desired outcomes, or opportunities to seize, highlighting what the organization could gain from executing the change. Question 2. Why is the current situation not satisfactory? The significance of this question is that it can identify inefficiencies or gaps. So what should you look for in a response? Look for pain points and inefficiencies or risks that make the current state unacceptable. Question number 3. Why hasn't this problem been solved before? This question is valuable because it identifies historical challenges that provide context for all other activities. For this question, look for past challenges, constraints, or overlooked factors that prevented resolution in the past or could potentially prevent resolution in the future. The next category is stakeholder identification and engagement. This group focuses on identifying key stakeholders, understanding their roles, and determining their level of influence and interest in the project. These questions aim to determine who is impacted by the project and understand their concerns. Common pitfalls and tips. Overlooking key stakeholders is the most common requirement elicitation mistake. Be sure to ask probing questions about stakeholders who may not be top of mind in every stakeholder conversation to ensure full coverage. Next, avoid relying only on vocal stakeholders in meetings. Be sure to engage quieter stakeholders with anonymous surveys or one-on-one discussions. Not addressing stakeholder conflicts is also a common mistake. Use scenario-based questions to uncover conflicting needs early. Question number 4, who will be impacted by this change? This question plays a key role in identifying the affected stakeholders and their needs. Aim to identify stakeholders, end users, and other affected parties. Seek to uncover stakeholders that may not be top of mind or those who could be easily overlooked. Question number 5, who will use this feature? This question is essential because it defines the primary users and their needs, helping to identify key sources of information. Look for the primary users, their specific needs, and any expectations they might have for the future solution. Question number 6, who will deliver the inputs for the feature? The reason this question is important is that it identifies dependencies and integrations that need to be considered during stakeholder and impact analysis. Here, you need to identify sources of data, key actions that need to be taken in the process, or the materials that will be used or required to complete the functionality. Question number 7 is, who will receive the outputs of the feature? This question should be asked to identify the recipients of the feature results and deliverables. Be sure to get clarity on the end recipients and the use case for the output, which is how they will use it. Question number 8. Who can provide information about this change? This question focuses on identifying additional key informants for requirements gathering and elicitation. Responses should identify subject matter experts, relevant stakeholders, as well as system owners who may need to be involved in high-level decisions. Question number 9. Who can provide more details about this? This question is important because it identifies subject matter experts who may not initially be assigned to the project. Here you'll look for additional subject matter experts, end users, or stakeholders that can provide deep insights related to the change. Question number 10. Who are the decision makers for this change? This question establishes who has approval and decision-making authority. Responses should share the key approvers for the project, as well as the assignment for the RACI matrix. Next up is process and situation analysis. This category examines the current state of a process or system to identify inefficiencies, bottlenecks, and areas for improvement. These questions help map existing workflows and identify pain points. The common pitfalls and tips here include assuming current processes are well documented. Use observational techniques and process walkthroughs to avoid this pitfall. Another mistake is only capturing the happy path. Be intentional about asking specific questions about exceptions or failures to uncover edge cases. Forgetting to ask about informal workarounds is also common. To avoid this mistake, use open-ended questions about unexpected situations. Now let's look at question 11, which is, where does the process fit in the overall solution? This question is important because it defines context within the bigger picture. For this response, be sure the stakeholder connects the process and the larger workflows, and also pinpoints the process within the system. Question 12. When will the function/process start? The significance here is that it determines event triggers for processes and functions that may be impacted by the project. Key things to take note of include the timing of these events, any dependencies that impact whether or not the trigger will be initiated, and a clear definition of the event, trigger itself. Question 13. When will the function/process end? This question defines the conditions that indicate when the process is done. Here, stakeholders should identify defining endpoints or conditions that signal the completion of a relevant function or process. The next question is, when do you need to know about the outcome of this function? This question helps us determine the timing of notifications that need to occur once a function or process has been completed. The feedback will help identify critical deadlines that will impact the performance of the function, as well as reporting timelines to ensure the availability of relevant data and information. Question 15. Why is this process done this way? Asking this will help uncover legacy reasons or constraints that may need to be reconsidered. We should be looking for historical reasons that may provide context, compliance requirements that may drive activities, or technical considerations that might create constraints for a proposed solution. Question 16. How do you currently handle this issue? This question will enable us to understand existing workarounds that may need to be automated or prevented. Keep an eye out for various exceptions throughout the process and how stakeholders handle them. You may also note the current workarounds and how they can be resolved, and any quick fixes that could easily be addressed or automated for a quick win. Question 17. How often does this process occur? This question is important because it determines the frequency of the processes impacted by the project. This is a factor in determining requirement prioritization. Key things to look for include performance needs and scalability considerations, both of which may be inputs for non-functional requirements. Question 18 is, how long does this process take? This question is important because it will help us identify efficiency issues as well as set a benchmark to compare against for post-implementation performance assessments. Here, we are seeking to establish a turn time baseline to measure against timing constraints that need to be considered for the potential solution, and also potential bottlenecks that may be negatively impacting the time it takes to complete the process. The next question is, how many users will be involved in this process? This question is important for defining system load and usability impact. Look for an understanding of the current system capacity and potential capacity expectations, as well as current and future scalability considerations. These will also be inputs for non-functional requirements. If these questions are helping you think more clearly, imagine having 1,000 of them organized and ready to use. And I've created a master list of requirement elicitation questions that business analysts use to run stronger stakeholder interviews, uncover hidden requirements, and avoid rework. You can learn more by clicking the link below. Now we've approached requirements definition and analysis. This category involves refining, documenting, and analyzing requirements to ensure clarity and feasibility. These questions define detailed functional and non-functional requirements and confirm alignment with the business needs. The common pitfalls and tips here include accepting ambiguous requirements during requirement elicitation. To avoid this pitfall, ask for concrete examples to clarify vague statements. Another pitfall is assuming all users have the same needs. This can be addressed by segmenting questions by role. The next common pitfall is not capturing constraints early. Be sure to ask direct questions about constraints such as policies, regulations, or technical limitations we should consider. Question 20, what are the inputs to this function? Why is this question important? It's because it identifies consumed information and triggers that will need to be considered when defining qualifiers or conditions for requirements. When recording responses, be sure to capture process inputs and the mechanism for detecting them. These are tangible items that trigger the process to begin. Identifying the entry criteria is also important for defining requirements and acceptance criteria. These are conditions or situations that need to be met in order for the process to begin. Also, reference any previously identified dependencies, as these are often converted into entry criteria and inputs. Question 21. What are the outputs of this function? This question is key because it helps identify the expected results of the process. This is essential for providing clarity and evaluation criteria. Be sure to gain a clear understanding of expected deliverables that will need to be created by the function in the form of outputs. Also, capture system responses that result from the successful completion of the function. These are translated into exit criteria during analysis. Question 22. What data or information is involved? This often overlooked question is important because it initiates the data requirement gathering and elicitation process. Here, we will need to uncover relevant data elements that will need to be tracked by the solution, data attributes that characterize the key data elements, and the data sources to support the integration process. Question 23. What does this feature need to do? This is an essential question that defines the core functionalities of the solution. Here, you should look for the desired capabilities of the stakeholders, the system behaviors that will enable these capabilities, and the expected outcomes that will indicate the successful completion of the function. Question 24. What is the benefit of doing this? The response to this question will help determine the business value that is driving the change. This question will need to be asked early on to define business goals, business objectives, and the desired outcome. Collectively, these elements will establish the business requirements. Question 25. What are the components of this feature? This is another often overlooked question that helps identify the key parts of a feature, and this is critical for providing input into the design process. Here, we are aiming to construct the concepts regarding the workflow and steps that drive the feature components, the modules and interfaces that establish the UI requirements, and the screens and fields that house the data elements. Question 26. What would be an example of this? This question is important because it ensures a shared understanding of a situation through application. Be sure the responses provide clear examples of relevant situations, specific scenarios that will allow a solid understanding, and concrete use cases that can be documented and analyzed. The next question is, what alternative scenarios are there? This question needs to be asked to capture edge cases and exceptions that will need to be considered for testing. The responses will generally consist of alternative scenarios that represent less likely pathways to complete a function or goal, exception situations that will prevent the user from achieving the goal or completing the function, and edge cases which are still valid situations but considered extremely rare compared to the alternate path. Question 28. Where would the user access this feature? This information determines the interface and accessibility needs of the feature or solution. Key elements to capture include user interface requirements that guide how the user will interact with specific aspects of the system entry points to establish the user's initial interaction with the system, and the work location, which will drive a number of non-functional requirements down the line, such as localization, accessibility, and security. Question 29. Where would the user be physically located when using this feature? This question helps determine environmental constraints that impact operation. Be sure to look for location-based considerations, accessibility requirements, and connectivity needs. These are all factors that define the non-functional requirements of the overall solution. Question 30. Where would the results be visible? The answer to this question identifies how to confirm the completion of a process or function, which will be essential for testing and validation. Key elements to consider include reporting interfaces that will be used to inspect details and validate accuracy, dashboards that will monitor real-time performance status and key performance indicators at a glance, and output destinations such as APIs, files, or downstream systems that confirm that the output reached the right place in the correct format. Question 31. When will this feature be used? This question sets the stage for defining usage scenarios and boundaries for the requirements. Be prepared to identify various use cases and scenarios, peak periods that will drive scalability and availability requirements, and the dependencies that dictate the sequence and boundaries of the feature. Question 32. What systems are involved in this feature/function? This question sets the stage to determine the technical scope and requirements that will drive the solution design. Work with solution architects and developers to outline technical architecture that provides the structural blueprint of how the solution will be built. Internal system interactions describe how components within the system communicate, and external system relationships that describe how the system interacts with systems outside the solution we plan to build. Now we've reached risk management and impact analysis. This category focuses on identifying potential risks, assessing their impact, and planning mitigation strategies. Questions here should uncover project uncertainties and assess the impact of changes. Now let's look at common pitfalls and how to avoid them. The first pitfall is only focusing on obvious risks related to a particular change. Be sure to ask about unexpected problems that could arise in an effort to explore hidden risks. The next pitfall is not considering compliance risks. Keep these top of mind by asking targeted questions about legal or regulatory requirements. Another common pitfall is failing to assess the actual risk impact. Avoid this by asking questions about the risk materialization of specific risk events. Question 33. What concerns do you have about the current situation? This question initiates the identification of problems and pain points for the stakeholders. These generally come in the form of user frustration that occurs on a regular basis, bottlenecks that might be hindering performance, or areas of risk that represent what is wrong today and also what could go wrong in the future. Question 34. What are your most pressing issues? Feedback from this question captures urgent needs and requirements that will need to take precedence over other areas. The building blocks to look for will be any key challenges for the stakeholder or organization, high priority needs and the impact if they are not addressed, and the prioritization factors that determine what's important to the stakeholders and the organization. Collectively, these will help establish prioritization. Question 35. What concerns do you have about the change? Responses to this question can identify resistance to change from the stakeholders. Be on the lookout for indications of cultural risk to help you understand how people think, behave, and make decisions. Operational risks that may highlight the practical and workflow-based reasons people may resist change, and potential roadblocks to adaptation, such as a lack of training and support or poor communication. Question 36. What assumptions do you have about the change? The response to this question may uncover hidden expectations or requirements for the solution that aren't top of mind. Good responses should include assumptions that will need to be managed and confirmed implicit requirements that might be critical but not commonly thought of, or unique perspectives about expectations that may need to be validated or considered. Question 37, what are the major concerns if the change is implemented incorrectly? The significance of this question is that it identifies undesirable or unexpected outcomes. Pay attention to the mention of areas of vulnerability, such as weaknesses in your people, processes, technology, suppliers, consequences and impacts levels that describe what happens if a risk materializes and how severe the damage will be, as well as continuity considerations to determine how quickly the organization can recover when undesirable outcomes occur. Question 38. How will this change impact other areas? This question is essential because it uncovers considerations for stakeholder and impact analysis. Keep an eye out for cross-functional dependencies that describe how activities in one group rely on work done by another group, input sources and output targets to clarify which interfaces and service level agreements could be disrupted by the change, and unexpected stakeholders whose work or interests are affected but were not initially identified, leading to unexpected outcomes. The next question category is prioritization and decision making. The questions deal with ranking requirements and making informed trade-offs based on business value, feasibility, and constraints. These questions assess the importance of the features and establish prioritization criteria. Now let's look at the common pitfalls and tips to avoid them. First is letting stakeholders prioritize without justification. To avoid this, be sure to ask about the basis of priority levels. Another pitfall is not aligning priorities with business goals. Be intentional about asking how a priority contributes to organizational success. Next is ignoring dependencies. Remember to ask if other features rely on a particular feature to identify interdependencies. Now, our next question is, what is the priority of this requirement? This question is valuable because it helps determine the level of business value. Good responses to this question include clear priority groupings that give executives and teams a quick visual way to see where value is concentrated, prioritization and ranking factors to create a consistent and transparent scoring model, and implementation planning considerations to connect the value of a project to what can actually be delivered, given timelines, dependencies, and constraints. Now we approach question 40. Why does this requirement have this priority? This question carries importance because its response justifies the prioritization level given to a requirement. Essential components to capture include a clear rationale for prioritization decisions that provide a link between the requirement and business objectives, basis of prioritization and ranking to define the criteria and method used to compare requirements, and ranking accelerators to identify the factors that can legitimately boost a requirement's position, even when its general ranking is similar to others. The next group of questions is related to solution design and validation. This category ensures that the proposed solution meets business and technical needs before full implementation. Questions in this category help evaluate user expectations and solution feasibility. Common pitfalls and tips. The first pitfall here is not involving end users in the validation process. Be sure to have an understanding of how solutions fit into the end user workflow. Overlooking scalability and future growth is another pitfall. Incorporate questions regarding anticipated changes in the next few years. It's also common to ignore integration considerations during elicitation. Ask about other tools or systems the solution must interact with in order to function correctly. Now let's move on to question 41. What would cause the feature to fail? This question aims to identify the potential failure points that need to be accounted for. The responses here should give some indication of error conditions that indicate where the solution may break down due to invalid inputs or unexpected system behavior, component dependencies that expose how different parts of the solution rely on each other, and contingency considerations that define what the solution should do when something goes wrong. This ensures that the system continues operate or recover smoothly. Question 42, when is the system available or unavailable? This question matters because it defines system uptime and downtime expectations that need to be considered. Key elements to look for in a response include availability requirements to establish what stakeholders consider an acceptable level of continuous operation, operational procedures to outline how the system is monitored, supported, and managed, and maintenance schedules to outline when planned downtime will occur. Question 43, how do you know this process is working well? This question is significant because it defines evaluation criteria and success measures that are used to assess performance. A good response should include success measures to define how the project's outcomes will be assessed, performance benchmarks to establish the standards against which the project's results will be measured, and satisfaction criteria to define the qualitative expectations of stakeholders. Question 44. What existing systems does this solution need to integrate with? The value in this question is that it ensures alignment with the current IT landscape. High-quality responses should discuss existing systems that define the baseline reality the solution must operate within, technology changes that influence whether a solution will be viable in the future, and compatibility considerations to ensure the solution can work reliably across the IT ecosystem. Question 45. How do you measure success for this feature? This question plays a key role in aligning expectations with measurable outcomes. A strong response provides clear metrics to define what success looks like in measurable, observable terms, key performance indicators that identify the most critical metrics that reflect progress toward objectives, and validation methods that define how results will be verified and confirmed. The next category is testing and quality assurance. This section ensures that the solution meets functional and non-functional requirements before deployment. Here, the question should facilitate defining testing criteria and success metrics. Now let's look at the common pitfalls and tips. The first pitfall is not defining clear success criteria. Overcome this by asking about the expected outcomes of the feature. Another common pitfall is ignoring negative test cases. Be sure to ask about incomplete or unsuccessful scenarios regarding the feature. Now let's move forward to question 46. How will this requirement be tested? The question is essential because it ensures testability and measurability during validation and testing activities. Essential components for this response include clear test cases that outline how the solution will be validated, acceptance criteria that establish what must be true for a requirement or user story to be accepted, and evaluation methods that determine how success will be measured beyond functional correctness. Question 47. How will exceptions be handled? This question is important because it ensures proper error handling that represents exceptions and edge cases. Be sure to pay attention to the mention of process defects and roadblocks that help identify where and why errors are likely to occur, error handling protocols that define how the system and users should respond when an error occurs, and fallback mechanisms that ensure the solution can continue operating when errors cannot be immediately resolved. And the last category is metrics and reporting. This area focuses on understanding data and tracking needs and key business decisions. These questions help define data and reporting requirements, common pitfalls, and tips to avoid them. The first pitfall here is forgetting reporting requirements altogether. Make asking about expected insights needed from reports a standard part of your elicitation. Not validating reporting metrics is another pitfall. Be intentional about asking questions to ensure metrics are accurately represented by what is being tracked. Now let's look at question 48. What information needs to be tracked for reporting? This question needs to be asked to ensure that reports capture relevant data that will provide key insights. A thorough response should provide specific data points that define what raw information must be captured, performance metrics that explain how the data should be analyzed, and key performance indicators that represent what matters most to the business. Question 49. Who are the primary users of these reports? This question is worth asking because it helps tailor the content, format, and level of detail needed for the reporting. Ensure the feedback discusses specific user roles that determine what information is needed and how it should be presented, user data literacy that influences how complex the data and visualizations should be, and report use cases that outline why the report exists and how it will be used. Lastly is question number 50. What decisions will be made with the report data? This question focuses on ensuring reports provide actionable insights that enable data-driven decision-making. A good response should outline specific business decisions that define what actions the report is meant to support, thresholds for action that establish when action is required, and key trends or patterns provide context for understanding performance over time.